Hi everyone, welcome to Pine Hat. I hope you're doing well. Tonight, I want to make the case that Gravity Falls, a show about a brother and sister spending the summer with their great uncle in a small town full of supernatural mysteries, is quietly one of the most psychologically rich family stories ever told in animation. On the surface, this show is about monsters, secret journals, and a dream demon who wants to destroy reality. But underneath the codes and conspiracies, creator Alex Hirsch built something far more human. He built a family portrait, a portrait of two generations of twins, a con man with a broken heart, a genius who trusted the wrong voice, and two 12-year-old kids who walked into all of that baggage and somehow managed to save everyone, including each other. By tracing the backstories, behavioral patterns, and quiet emotional truths buried inside each member of the Pines family, we can see how Gravity Falls became a genuine exploration of parental rejection, sibling enmeshment, identity formation, trust, and betrayal, the long shadow of childhood trauma, and what it actually looks like when a broken family starts to heal. Not through magic or a reset button, but through sacrifice, forgiveness, and the terrifying decision to let people see who you really are. But before we begin, I'd just like to kindly ask you all to subscribe. It's completely free and it really helps us improve the videos for this wonderful community we've managed to build. Anyway, that's enough. Let's begin. If you want to understand why the Pines family is the way it is, you cannot start with Stan. You cannot start with Ford. You cannot even start with Dipper and Mabel. You have to start one generation back. You have to start with the man who set the entire chain of damage into motion, and that man is Philbrick Pines. Philbrick Pines is the father of Stanley and Stanford Pines. He ran a pawn shop called Pines Pawns in a rundown seaside town called Glass Shard Beach, New Jersey. That name alone tells you something. Glass Shard Beach. It sounds like a place where things are already broken before you even arrive. And for the Pines family, that is exactly what it was. Philbrick is described in the show as a strict man, tough as a cinder block, and not easily impressed. He wore dark glasses that hid his eyes, which is a small visual detail that says everything about who he was. You could never quite see what he was thinking. You could never read him. And for his children, that meant they could never be sure where they stood with him. Now, from what the show reveals, Philbrick was not a cartoonishly evil father. He was not beating his children with belts or locking them in closets. What he was doing was something that, in many ways, can be even more damaging because it is harder to name and harder to escape. Philbrick practiced what many people call tough love, but what a psychologist would more accurately describe as conditional regard. Conditional regard is when a parent's love and approval are not given freely. They are given as rewards for meeting certain standards and withdrawn as punishment when those standards are not met. The child learns very quickly that they are not loved for who they are. They are loved for what they produce. Their worth is not inherent, it is earned, and it can be taken away at any moment. For Philbrick, the standard was clear. Money, success, making something of yourself. He ran a pawn shop. He lived in a rough neighborhood. He wanted his sons to be the ones who made it out. And the vehicle for that escape was Ford, the brilliant twin with 6 fingers on each hand and an IQ that could get him into any college in the country. When Ford's perpetual motion machine caught the attention of West Coast Tech, one of the most prestigious universities in the country, Philbrick saw dollar signs. He saw a future. He saw everything he had worked for finally paying off. And then Stan broke the machine. Whether it was an accident or intentional is something the show leaves deliberately ambiguous. Stan was terrified of losing his brother. Ford was about to leave for a college across the country, and the two of them had spent their entire lives together. They had a dream of sailing around the world on a boat they had been building since they were children, the Stan-O-War. The idea that Ford might leave, that the only person who had ever truly been on Stan's side might disappear, was more than Stan could handle. But regardless of what actually happened, Philbrick made his judgment instantly. He decided that Stan had sabotaged Ford's future on purpose, and his response was devastating. He did not sit his sons down and talk about it. He did not try to understand what had happened or why. He kicked Stan out of the house. He told him that he had cost the family a potential fortune and that he was not welcome back until he had made that money himself. Let that settle for a moment. A father looked at his teenage son and told him that his presence in the family home was contingent on his financial value, not his character, not his effort, not the fact that he was a scared kid who did not want to lose his brother. His worth as a son was measured in dollars, and he had come up short. A psychologist would look at that moment and see the genesis of almost everything that follows in the Pines family story. Because what Philbrick did in that single act was not just cruel, it was instructive. He taught both of his sons a lesson that would shape the rest of their lives. He taught Stan that love is transactional, that if you fail, you lose everything, that the people who are supposed to protect you will throw you away the moment you stop being useful. And he taught Ford that he was the valuable one, that his worth came from his mind, his achievements, his potential, that the family's hopes rested on his shoulders and his shoulders alone. Both of those lessons are poison, and both of them played out across decades of estrangement, isolation, and pain. There is a moment later in the series when Stan, now in his 60s, tells Ford during the chaos of Weirdmageddon that their father was right about him, that he really was just a screw-up. He says it plainly, like it is a fact he accepted a long time ago. And in that moment, you realize that Stan has been carrying his father's words inside him for over 40 years. They became his internal voice, the voice that told him he was not good enough, that he did not deserve to come home, that the only way to earn love was to earn money. Philbrick Pines is barely in the show. He appears in one extended flashback and is mentioned a handful of times. But his fingerprints are on everything. He is the architect of the rift between Stan and Ford. He is the reason Stan spent a decade homeless and in and out of prison. He is the reason Ford learned to tie his self-worth to his intellect and his intellect alone. And he is the reason that when Bill Cipher came knocking, Ford was so hungry for validation that he opened the door. In psychology, there is a concept called the intergenerational transmission of trauma. It means that pain that is not processed by one generation gets handed down to the next. Not through genetics, but through patterns. Through the way parents speak to their children, the way they handle conflict, the way they define love and success and failure. Philbrick did not process his own frustrations or his own disappointments. He loaded them onto his sons, and his sons, in turn, carried those patterns forward into every relationship they ever had. The Pines family story does not start with a portal or a journal or a dream demon. It starts with a father who could not see past his own expectations to the two boys standing right in front of him. And the ripple effects of that failure are still being felt 2 generations later in a small town in Oregon during the strangest summer of anyone's life. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. If Philbrick Pines built the machine that broke this family apart, then Stanley Pines is the one who spent the rest of his life trying to put it back together with nothing but duct tape, stubbornness, and an almost pathological refusal to give up on the people he loved, even when those people had given up on him. Stanley Pines was born roughly 15 minutes after his twin brother, Stanford. He grew up in Glass Shard Beach with no particular academic talent, no special gifts, and no clear path forward. What he had was Ford, and for the first 17 or 18 years of his life, that was enough. The two of them were inseparable. They were each other's only real friends. They built the Stan O'War together on the beach, planning to sail the world when they grew up. They fought bullies together. They explored together. They dreamed together. And then the science fair happened, and all of it ended in a single night. After Philbrick kicked him out, Stan was alone for the first time in his life. And the word alone does not begin to capture what that means for someone like Stan. He was not just without a home. He was without an identity. His entire sense of self had been built around two things: being Ford's brother and being a Pines. And in one evening, both of those things were taken from him. What follows is one of the most quietly devastating backstories in animated television. Stan spent roughly a decade drifting. He lived out of his car. He ran scams. He sold faulty products under fake names. He was banned from multiple states. He was imprisoned in at least 3 different countries. He ended up in a Colombian jail cell where his only friends were 2 inmates named Jorge and Rico. He tried to make the fortune his father demanded, and he failed over and over and over again. A psychologist would look at this period of Stan's life and see a textbook case of what happens when a young person is cast out of their attachment system with no resources and no support. The human brain is not designed for prolonged isolation, especially during the late teenage years and early 20s when identity formation is at its most critical. Without a stable base, without people who know you and care about you, the brain goes into survival mode. It focuses entirely on the short term. How do I eat today? Where do I sleep tonight? Who can I trust right now? Stan became a con man not because he was inherently dishonest, but because conning people was the only skill set that kept him alive. He learned to read people, to tell them what they wanted to hear, to charm his way into and out of situations. He learned that the truth was a luxury he could not afford. And he learned, above all else, that the only person who was ever going to look out for Stanley Pines was Stanley Pines. These survival strategies saved his life, but they also hardened into permanent features of his personality. By the time we meet Stan in the show, he is a man in his 60s who lies as naturally as he breathes. He runs the Mystery Shack, a tourist trap built on deception. He charges people money to look at fake exhibits. He steals from his own customers. He has been arrested multiple times. He counterfeits money. He evades taxes. On the surface, he looks like a selfish, greedy old man who cares about nothing but his next dollar. But here is what makes Stan one of the most psychologically complex characters in animation. None of that is the real Stan. Every single one of those behaviors is armor. Underneath the scams and the greed and the lies is a man who has spent 30 years working on a single project, night after night, in a hidden basement underneath his own home, rebuilding his brother's interdimensional portal, trying to bring Ford back. And there is another layer to this that often gets overlooked. Stan did not just stay in Gravity Falls to work on the portal. He built a life there. He created the Mystery Shack. He hired Seuss. He became a fixture of the community. He made friendships. He created something, and all of it was done under a false name. He was living as Stanford Pines. He had faked his own death as Stanley. For 30 years, the real Stanley Pines did not exist in the public record. A psychologist would find this detail enormously significant. To erase your own name, to live for decades as someone else, requires a specific kind of psychological damage. It requires you to believe, on some fundamental level, that who you actually are is not worth keeping. That the world is better off without Stanley Pines. That the name your parents gave you is a liability, not a gift. And this belief did not come from nowhere. It came directly from Philbrick, who told Stan through words and actions that his only value was financial. It came from a childhood where Ford was the golden child and Stan was the afterthought. It came from a decade on the road where every authority figure and every institution confirmed what Philbrick had already taught him. You are a nobody, and nobody will miss you when you are gone. Stan internalized that message so completely that he did not just accept it, he enacted it. He made himself disappear. He became a ghost wearing his brother's name, existing in a town where nobody knew who he really was, telling himself that this was all temporary, that it was all in service of the plan, that one day Ford would come back and everything would make sense. But 30 years is not temporary. 30 years is a life. And somewhere in the middle of those 30 years, something interesting happened. Stan started to build something real inside the fake life. The Mystery Shack became a genuine business. Suze became a genuine surrogate son. The people of Gravity Falls became genuine neighbors. Stan, without meaning to, created exactly the kind of community he had been denied as a child. A place where people knew him, relied on him, and showed up for him. The cruel irony is that they knew him as Stanford, not Stanley. The love he received was addressed to the wrong name, and Stan, being Stan, could not let himself fully accept it because somewhere in the back of his mind, he knew the truth. These people do not love me. They love the person I am pretending to be. If they knew who I really was, the screw-up, the dropout, the criminal, they would leave too. This is one of the deepest psychological wounds a person can carry. The belief that you are fundamentally unlovable in your truest form. That the only way to receive affection is to perform a version of yourself that is more acceptable than the real thing. It is the same wound that drives people to maintain exhausting social masks for years or decades. It is the same wound that makes people panic when a relationship gets too intimate, because intimacy means the mask might slip. When Dipper and Mabel arrive for the summer, they become the first people in 30 years who have the potential to see the real Stan. They live in his house. They observe him when his guard is down. They are children, which means they are perceptive in ways that adults often are not, because they have not yet learned the social conventions that teach us to ignore what is right in front of our faces. And slowly, reluctantly, grudgingly, Stan begins to let them in. Not all the way, not without resistance, but enough. Enough that when the summer ends, the loss of Dipper and Mabel hits him harder than he expected. Enough that when the choice comes to sacrifice everything, he does not hesitate. Because for the first time in his life, Stan has people who love him for something close to who he actually is. Not the Stanford Pines performance, not the Mr. Mystery character, but the grumpy, loving, terrified, stubborn old man underneath all of it. 30 years. Think about the psychological weight of that. Stan assumed his brother's identity. He faked his own death. He built a life in a town where nobody knew who he really was, running a business he invented on the spot, all so he could stay close to the portal and keep working. Every night after the shack closed, he went downstairs and tried to solve a problem that the smartest man he had ever known could not solve with 3 journals and a decade of research. Stan had one journal. He had no scientific training, he had no help, and he never stopped. A psychologist would ask a very simple question about this. Why? Why would a man who was rejected by his own family, who was told he was worthless, who was thrown away like a broken tool, spend 3 decades of his life trying to save the brother who, in Stan's mind, was at least partially responsible for his exile? And the answer reveals the deepest wound in Stan's psychology. Stan never stopped believing that bringing Ford back would fix everything. That if he could just undo the one mistake, the broken science project, the fight, the portal accident, then somehow the family would come back together. His father would see that he was worth something. Ford would forgive him. He would finally be enough. This is a pattern that psychologists see in people who experienced parental rejection during childhood. They spend their adult lives trying to earn the approval they were denied. They set impossible goals for themselves, not because they genuinely believe they can achieve them, but because the pursuit itself gives them a purpose. It gives them a reason to keep going. It transforms their pain into a mission. Stan's mission was Ford. It was always Ford. And when the portal finally opened in the Season 1 finale and Ford stepped through, Stan expected something. He expected relief. He expected gratitude. He expected, on some deep and probably unconscious level, for Ford to look at him and say, "You did it. You brought me back. You matter." What he got instead was a punch in the face. Ford was furious. He had been trapped in other dimensions for 30 years, and from his perspective, Stan was the reason. Stan had caused the fight that activated the portal. Stan had ignored his warnings about how dangerous the machine was. Stan had stolen his identity and turned his life's work into a cheap tourist attraction. Ford did not come through that portal with gratitude. He came through with 30 years of resentment. And in that moment, you can see something break behind Stan's eyes. Not dramatically, not with a speech or a breakdown. It is more like watching a light dim. Because Stan just learned that 3 decades of sacrifice were not enough, that nothing he could do would ever be enough, that the wound his father opened when he was 17 years old was still bleeding, and it was never going to stop. This is what makes Stan's arc in Season 2 so powerful from a psychological standpoint. He does not give up. He does not walk away. He continues to try. He is grumpy about it. He is resentful. He picks fights with Ford. He refuses to join the Zodiac Circle unless Ford thanks him. He is petty and stubborn and infuriating. But he stays. He stays in the same house as the brother who rejected him, taking care of the great-niece and great-nephew who were sent to spend the summer with him, running a business he built with his bare hands, and never once asking for help. And then comes the moment that defines Stanley Pines entirely. In the final battle against Bill Cipher, when the Dream Demon has taken over Gravity Falls and reality itself is collapsing, Ford comes up with a plan. If they can trick Bill into entering someone's mind and then erase that mind with the memory gun, Bill will be destroyed. But the person whose mind is erased will lose everything. Every memory, every experience, every piece of who they are. Ford intends to sacrifice himself. He has a metal plate in his skull that would prevent the memory gun from working on him. So the plan does not quite work as originally conceived. But Stan sees an opportunity that Ford does not. If they switch clothes, if Stan pretends to be Ford and lets Bill into his mind instead, they can erase Stan's memories and take Bill down with them. Stan volunteers, without hesitation, without negotiation. He puts on Ford's coat, he imitates Ford's voice, and he lets Bill Cipher walk right into his head. And as Ford fires the memory gun, and Stan's memories begin to dissolve, Stan punches Bill into oblivion from inside his own mind. His last coherent thought, looking at a photo of himself with Dipper and Mabel, is that he was good for something after all. That line will break your heart if you understand what it means. Stan spent his entire life being told he was useless, a screw-up, a waste of potential. And his final act, the thing he was good for, was erasing himself so that the people he loved could survive. He did not save the world with a clever plan or a powerful weapon. He saved it by offering up the only thing he had left, which was himself. A psychologist would look at Stan's sacrifice and see 2 things happening at once. On one level, it is genuinely heroic. It is an act of profound love and courage. Stan chose his family over himself. He chose his brother, his niece and nephew, the town he had come to call home, over his own existence. That is beautiful. But on another level, there is something painfully sad about it. Because Stan's willingness to erase himself is not just brave, it is consistent with a lifetime of believing that his own existence was the problem, that the best thing Stanley Pines could do for the people he loved was disappear. His father told him he was not worth keeping. Ford blamed him for ruining everything. And so Stan concluded, probably without even realizing it, that the most valuable thing he could do was stop existing. The show gives Stan a happy ending. His memories are restored through Mabel's scrapbook. He reconciles with Ford. They sail the world together on the Stan O-War 2, fulfilling the dream they had as children. It is earned and it is wonderful. But the scars are still there. They are always there. Stan carries them in the way he speaks, in the way he deflects emotion with jokes, in the way he cannot say what he feels without wrapping it in sarcasm or anger. Stanley Pines is, in many ways, the emotional backbone of Gravity Falls. Not because he is the wisest or the most articulate or the most emotionally intelligent character. He is none of those things. He is the backbone because he is the one who refuses to let the family fall apart, even when the family treats him terribly, even when the cost is everything he has. He holds on, and he does not let go. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But Stan is only one half of the original Pines twins. And if Stan's story is about what happens when love becomes something you have to earn, Ford's story is about something equally dangerous. What happens when you are so desperate for connection that you open the door to the worst possible version of it. Stanford Philbrick Pines was born 15 minutes before his twin brother Stanley. And those 15 minutes might as well have been 15 years for how differently the world treated them. From the very beginning, Ford was the special one. He was the smart one. He was the one with potential, the one their father Philbrick looked at with something approaching pride. And he was the one with 6 fingers on each hand, a rare birth defect that marked him as different from the moment he entered the world. Now, being marked as different is a complicated thing for a child. On one hand, Ford's 6 fingers made him a target. He was bullied for them. Kids called him a freak. The world looked at his hands and saw something wrong. But on the other hand, those same fingers became the foundation of everything Ford built his identity on. He was not like other people. He was unusual. He was special. And as he grew older, as his intellect began to outstrip everyone around him, that sense of specialness became the core of who he was. A psychologist would point out that there is a particular vulnerability that comes with being the gifted child in a dysfunctional family. When your worth is tied to your intelligence, you learn that being smart is not just something you do. It is something you are. It is the reason people care about you. It is the reason your father pays attention. It is the reason you matter. And the terrifying flip side of that belief is this: if you stop being the smartest person in the room, you stop mattering. Ford carried this belief with him through childhood, through college, and all the way to Gravity Falls. He graduated from Backup's Moore University, a school he considered beneath him after losing his chance at West Coast Tech. He earned a doctorate 3 years ahead of schedule. He became nationally ranked in his field. He was brilliant, and he knew it. And that combination of genuine brilliance and deep insecurity about his own value is what made him the perfect target for Bill Cipher. When Ford arrived in Gravity Falls in the early 1980s, he came alone. He had no real friends. His relationship with his family was non-existent. Stan had been kicked out years earlier, and Ford had done nothing to stop it. He had watched his brother get thrown away and said nothing. Whether that was because he agreed with their father's judgment, or because he was too afraid to challenge it, or because he was simply too focused on his own future to care, the result was the same. Ford let it happen. And so Ford came to Gravity Falls as a man with no attachments, no social network, no one checking in on him. He had his research, his intellect, and his ambition. That was it. He spent years cataloging the supernatural anomalies of the town, filling 3 journals with his findings. He was doing important work, but he was doing it completely alone. And loneliness, real deep sustained loneliness, does something to the human mind. It makes you hungry, not for food, for connection, for someone who sees you, for someone who understands what you are trying to do and tells you it matters. Bill Cipher saw that hunger, and he fed it. Bill presented himself to Ford as a muse. He told Ford that he chose one brilliant mind every century to inspire. Think about what that means to someone like Ford. A being of immense power looked at the entire world and chose him. Not because of his family connections or his money or his social skills, because of his mind, because of the thing that Ford had always believed was the only valuable part of himself. Bill saw Ford's intellect and called it worthy of cosmic attention. Of course, Ford said yes. Of course, he opened the door. Of course, he let Bill in. Because Bill was offering Ford the one thing he had never been able to find in the human world: unconditional intellectual validation from someone who seemed to exist on an even higher plane than Ford himself. A psychologist would recognize this dynamic immediately. It is, in many ways, a textbook example of how emotional manipulation works. You find someone who is isolated, you identify their deepest need, and then you present yourself as the only person who can meet that need. You become indispensable. You become the one relationship they cannot afford to lose. And once that dependency is established, you can steer them wherever you want. Bill steered Ford toward building the interdimensional portal. He told Ford it was a gateway to understanding the universe. He told Ford it would answer all his questions. What he did not tell Ford was that the portal was actually a door between dimensions, and that Bill intended to use it to bring his nightmare realm crashing into the physical world. Ford trusted Bill completely. He built a shrine to the triangle demon in his study. He allowed Bill to enter his mind freely. He pushed away the one person who tried to warn him, his research partner, Fiddleford McGucket, who glimpsed the nightmare realm through the portal during a test run and came back traumatized. McGucket begged Ford to destroy the portal. Ford dismissed him because Bill said it was fine, and Ford trusted Bill more than he trusted any living human being. The psychology behind Ford's trust in Bill is not just about manipulation. It is about something deeper and sadder. Ford trusted Bill because Bill was the first being in Ford's life who seemed to value him without conditions. Philbrick valued Ford for his potential to make money. The academic world valued Ford for his publications and his degrees. Stan valued Ford as a brother, but Ford, carrying the weight of their estrangement, could not fully receive that. Bill, or so it seemed, valued Ford simply for being Ford, for being brilliant, for being different, for being the six-fingered genius that nobody else could understand. When Ford finally discovered the truth, that Bill had been using him all along, the betrayal was not just intellectual, it was personal. It was intimate. Ford had let Bill see every corner of his mind. He had shared things with Bill that he had never shared with any human being. He had built a shrine to the demon in his study. He had modeled parts of his own home after Bill's aesthetic. He had given Bill access to his thoughts, his dreams, his vulnerabilities. All of it was a lie. Bill did not care about Ford's brilliance. Bill cared about what Ford's brilliance could build for him. The supplementary material, particularly the Book of Bill, reveals that this relationship was even more complex and more painful than the show alone suggests. Ford considered Bill a true friend, possibly the only real friend he had ever had. He called Bill his muse. Bill, in turn, called Ford Sixer, a nickname that was both affectionate and deeply ironic, since it referenced the very physical trait that had made Ford an outsider his entire life. Bill took the thing Ford was most self-conscious about and turned it into a term of endearment. That is textbook grooming behavior, You take your target's deepest insecurity and you reframe it as special. You make them feel that the thing they hate most about themselves is actually the thing that makes them worthy of your attention. And once they believe that, you own them. Ford's reaction to the betrayal tells us everything about the depth of the wound. He did not just end the partnership, he shut down the portal. He wrote warnings in his journals so desperate and urgent that they are practically screaming off the page. He installed a metal plate in his own skull. He wrote the words, "Trust no one," and made them his entire philosophy. And then he spiraled into paranoia so severe that he became, in many ways, as isolated and unstable as McGucket, just without the memory gun. The 30 years Ford spent in other dimensions only deepened these patterns. He survived by being self-sufficient, suspicious, and ruthlessly competent. He learned to read every situation as a potential trap. He learned to trust nothing and no one. He became very, very good at being alone. And when he finally returned to Gravity Falls through the portal Stan had been rebuilding for 3 decades, he walked back into his own home as a man who had perfected the art of not needing anyone. But perfection is not health, and not needing anyone is not the same as not wanting anyone. Ford wanted connection. You could see it in the way he gravitated toward Dipper, in the way he studied the twins with something like wonder, as if he could not quite believe that there were people in the world who were genuinely glad to see him. In the way he held the journal when he got it back, running his fingers over the pages like a man reuniting with a piece of his own soul. Ford wanted to be part of this family. He just did not know how. Every tool he had for connecting with people had been either destroyed by Bill's betrayal or atrophied through decades of isolation. He was like a man who had spent so long in the dark that the light hurt his eyes. The warmth of human connection was something he craved and could not tolerate. And so he did what lonely people often do when they are finally surrounded by people who care. He pulled back. He lectured instead of listened. He offered intellectual partnership instead of emotional closeness. He chose the relationship that felt safest, mentoring Dipper, and avoided the ones that felt most threatening, which were the ones that required vulnerability. Ford's relationship with Stan in Season 2 is the relationship that requires the most vulnerability of all. Because Stan is the person Ford hurt the most, and Stan is the person who reminds Ford of everything he has spent his life running from, the messy, emotional, unpredictable side of human connection that cannot be solved with equations or explained with theories. When Ford looks at Stan, he sees the brother he failed to protect. He sees the science fair. He sees the portal. He sees 30 years of guilt that he has never once allowed himself to fully feel. And rather than face any of that, Ford does what he has always done. He retreats into superiority. He treats Stan as less than. He refuses to acknowledge what Stan sacrificed to bring him back. He acts as though the 30 years of work Stan poured into the portal was motivated by selfishness rather than love. A psychologist would recognize this as a defense mechanism called intellectualization, where a person uses logic and analysis to avoid engaging with painful emotions. Ford cannot sit with the guilt of what happened to his brother, so he reframes the situation in a way that makes Stan the bad guy. Stan ruined his project. Stan messed with the portal. Stan stole his identity. By keeping Stan in the role of the incompetent brother, Ford does not have to reckon with his own complicity in everything that went wrong. It is only in the final moments, when the apocalypse is literally happening and there is no more room for ego or denial, that Ford finally cracks open. He agrees to Stan's plan. He fires the memory gun at his own brother's head. He watches Stan's mind dissolve. And in the aftermath, standing over a man who no longer knows his own name, Ford finally says what he should have said 40 years ago. He calls Stan a hero. He hugs him. He lets himself feel the weight of what his brother did for him. Not as an intellectual concept, but as an emotional reality. His brother loved him enough to die for him, and that fact, more than any equation or journal entry or interdimensional discovery, is the most important thing Ford Pines has ever learned. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But if Stan and Ford represent what happens when a family's damage is left untreated across decades, there is a new generation of Pines twins who walked into that damage during the summer of 2012. And they brought their own fears, their own patterns, and their own potential with them. Let's start with the older twin by 5 minutes. Mason Dipper Pines arrives in Gravity Falls at the age of 12 with a birthmark on his forehead shaped like the Big Dipper constellation, a suitcase full of anxieties, and an almost pathological need to understand everything around him. He is smart, curious, observant, and deeply insecure. He overthinks everything. He trusts slowly and loves fiercely. He is, in many ways, the heart of the show. And from a psychological standpoint, he is one of the most realistic portrayals of a pre-adolescent mind that animation has ever produced. To understand Dipper, you have to understand what he is running from and what he is running toward. He is running from the feeling that he does not matter, that he is too small, too young, too weird to be taken seriously. His birthmark made him a target for teasing. He hid it under a hat starting at age 5. His voice has not fully changed. He is shorter than his sister. He does not fit in with older kids. He does not fit in with popular kids. He reads detective novels and obsesses over mysteries because mysteries are the one thing he can solve. They are the one arena where his brain, the thing that makes him different, is an advantage instead of a liability. He is running toward significance, toward proof that he matters, that his curiosity is not just a weird hobby but a genuine gift, that the universe has a place for someone like him. And when he finds Journal 3 in the woods of Gravity Falls, it is like finding a permission slip from the universe itself. Someone before him, someone brilliant and serious and grown up, was asking the same questions Dipper asks. The journal validates him in a way that nothing in his regular life ever has. A psychologist looking at Dipper would see a child who is developmentally on track in many ways, but who carries a specific constellation of anxieties that shape almost every decision he makes. He has a persistent fear of failure. He has a persistent fear of being seen as immature or childlike. He has an intense need for control, which manifests as overplanning, obsessive research, and difficulty delegating. And he has trust issues that are reinforced at nearly every turn by the world around him. The trust issues are particularly important because they connect directly to the themes of the show. When Dipper opens Journal 3, one of the first things he reads is a warning from the author: trust no one. Those 3 words land on soil that was already fertile. Dipper was already a kid who found it easier to trust a book than a person. The journal gave him explicit permission to formalize that instinct, and for much of the series, he takes it to heart. He is suspicious of Stan from the beginning, and not without reason. Stan is a liar. He runs a business built on deception. He keeps secrets. He disappears into a hidden room behind the vending machine. Dipper's instincts about Stan are partially correct, but they are also filtered through a lens of anxiety that makes it hard for him to distinguish between a person who is dishonest and a person who is dangerous. Stan is the first. He is not the second. But Dipper cannot always tell the difference, because when you grow up anxious, the world feels more threatening than it actually is. This dynamic plays out most dramatically in the episode Not What He Seems, when Dipper discovers that Stan has been lying about nearly everything. He has a secret basement. He has been running the portal. He is not who he says he is. Dipper's trust, which was already fragile, shatters completely. He is ready to shut down the portal. He is ready to turn his back on the man who has been housing and feeding him all summer. Because the evidence says Stan cannot be trusted, and Dipper has always trusted evidence more than emotion. It is Mabel who makes the opposite choice. She trusts Stan, not because the evidence supports it, but because her heart tells her to. And she turns out to be right. The portal opens, Ford comes through. Stan was not a villain, he was a brother trying to save another brother. That moment is critical for Dipper's psychological development because it teaches him something his anxious brain desperately needs to learn: that logic and evidence are not always sufficient for navigating human relationships. Sometimes you have to trust the person, not the data. Sometimes the most rational choice is to follow your feelings. This is terrifying for someone like Dipper because feelings are messy and unpredictable and impossible to control. But it is also necessary because a life built entirely on suspicion and analysis is a life spent alone. Dipper's relationship with Ford in Season 2 mirrors this tension in interesting ways. When Ford arrives, Dipper finally has the mentor he has been looking for, an adult who takes him seriously, an adult who shares his obsession with the unknown, an adult who sees his curiosity as a strength rather than a nuisance. Ford validates Dipper the way Bill once validated Ford, not with flattery or manipulation, but with genuine recognition of a kindred spirit. But there is a cost. Ford's attention comes with an implicit expectation. He sees Dipper as his intellectual heir. He offers Dipper an apprenticeship that would require Dipper to stay in Gravity Falls while Mabel goes home. He frames the twin bond as a potential obstacle to Dipper's growth, echoing his own experience with Stan without realizing that he is potentially repeating the same mistake that tore his family apart a generation earlier. Dipper is tempted. Of course he is. Being Ford's apprentice would give him everything he thinks he wants: purpose, validation, a path forward as a serious researcher of the unknown. But it would also mean leaving Mabel. And this is where Dipper's story becomes a story about something more important than mysteries or monsters. It becomes a story about what you are willing to sacrifice for the people you love. The show does not make this choice easy or clean. Dipper genuinely struggles. He wants Ford's approval. He wants to stay in Gravity Falls. He wants to be the person Ford sees in him, but he also loves his sister. And in the end, that love is stronger than his ambition. Not because love always wins in some sentimental way, but because Dipper has spent an entire summer learning that the people who stand beside you matter more than the answers you find alone. This is the lesson that Ford never learned until it was almost too late. And it is the lesson that Dipper, at 12 years old, absorbs just in time. He chooses Mabel. He chooses family. He chooses connection over certainty. And in doing so, he breaks the cycle that started with Philbrick. He proves that the Pines family pattern of choosing achievement over attachment does not have to repeat forever. A psychologist watching Dipper's arc would see a child who starts the summer with clinical levels of anxiety and trust issues and ends it with genuine emotional growth. Not because his anxiety disappeared. It did not. Dipper will probably always be an anxious person, but because he learned to act in spite of that anxiety. He learned that trusting people is scary and worth it. He learned that being wrong about someone is painful, but not fatal. He learned that the bravest thing a person can do is not fight a monster or solve a code. It is tell someone you love them and mean it, even though you cannot control what happens next. There is a detail from supplementary material that makes Dipper's psychology even more poignant. In the Book of Bill, it is revealed that Bill Cipher knows what Dipper has nightmares about. And what Dipper has nightmares about is overhearing his parents fight. The same fight that prompted his parents to send him and Mabel to Gravity Falls in the first place. Dipper carries that memory with him like a stone in his pocket. He heard something he was not supposed to hear, something that suggested the stability of his home might not be as solid as he thought, and it broke something inside him. This is why the journal's warning, "Trust no one," landed with such devastating force. Dipper was not reading those words as a curious adventurer. He was reading them as a child who had already experienced the terrifying feeling of discovering that the adults in his life were keeping secrets. His parents were hiding their conflict. Stan was hiding his identity. Ford was hiding the rift. The entire adult world was a maze of deception, and Dipper, armed with nothing but a journal and his own anxious brain, was trying to navigate it without getting hurt. The fact that he comes out the other side, bruised but not broken, trusting but not naive, is a testament to the resilience that the show believes children are capable of. Dipper does not become cynical. He does not become hardened. He becomes something much more difficult and much more rare. He becomes someone who has seen the worst of what people can do and still chooses to believe in the best of what they are. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But Dipper is only half of the younger Pines twins, and his sister Mabel carries her own psychological weight, much of it hidden behind a smile so bright that most people, including her own family, never think to look behind it. If Dipper Pines is the twin who thinks too much, Mabel Pines is the twin who feels too much. She is optimistic, creative, chaotic, generous, emotional, impulsive, and fiercely loyal. She makes sweaters. She names her pet pig Waddles. She shoots a grappling hook at anything that moves. She has a new crush every 3 days. She is, on the surface, the brightest and most joyful character in the entire show. And that is exactly the problem. Because Mabel's brightness is not just personality. It is strategy. It is how she survives. And underneath the glitter and the enthusiasm is a girl who is terrified of one very specific thing: being alone. To understand Mabel, you have to understand her relationship with Dipper, because that relationship is the foundation of her entire emotional world. They are twins. They have been together since before they were born. They share a room. They share friends. They share adventures. Mabel's identity is not Mabel alone. It is Mabel and Dipper. They are a unit, a package deal. And the idea that this might someday change, that Dipper might grow in a different direction, that they might become separate people with separate lives, is the most frightening thing Mabel can imagine. More frightening than Bill Cipher. More frightening than the apocalypse. More frightening than anything Gravity Falls can throw at her. This fear does not appear out of nowhere. There are hints throughout the show that Mabel and Dipper's home life is not as stable as it appears. Their parents are never shown on screen except as partially visible figures in the first episode. In supplementary material, it is revealed that the twins were sent to Gravity Falls in a hurry because their parents were having arguments about something the kids were not supposed to hear. Dipper overheard one of these fights, and it gave him nightmares. The implication is clear. Mabel and Dipper's parents may be heading toward separation. And if that is the case, then Mabel's clinging to Dipper makes even more sense. He is not just her brother. He is her constant, the one thing in her life that she can count on not to change. A psychologist would look at Mabel and see a child with what is sometimes called anxious attachment. People with anxious attachment do not fear closeness. They fear the loss of closeness. They are the ones who text too much, who need constant reassurance, who interpret any sign of distance as a sign of rejection. They love big and they love loud, but their love carries a hidden clause. Please do not leave me. This pattern shows up throughout Gravity Falls in ways that are often played for comedy but carry real emotional weight. Mabel's serial crushes, which come and go at lightning speed, are not just a running gag. They are the behavior of a girl who is desperately looking for connection. Every boy she meets is a potential source of the kind of attachment she is terrified of losing with Dipper. She throws herself into each new crush with total commitment because half measures feel too risky. If she is going to care, she is going to care all the way. And if it falls apart, she will bounce right back and try again, because stopping would mean sitting with the loneliness. And sitting with the loneliness is the one thing she cannot do. The critical moment in Mabel's arc comes in Dipper and Mabel versus the future, when she learns that summer is ending. Her birthday party is falling apart. Her friends Candy and Grenda are drifting away. High school is looming, and then Dipper tells her, reluctantly and with obvious conflict, that Ford has offered him an apprenticeship in Gravity Falls. That Dipper might stay behind while Mabel goes home. Mabel's reaction is not proportionate. It is not the response of someone dealing with a mild disappointment. It is the response of someone whose worst fear is being confirmed. She is losing her brother, the one person she has always had, the one constant in a world that suddenly feels like it is spinning apart. She becomes distraught. She becomes desperate. And when Bill Cipher, disguised as Blendin Blandin, offers her a way to stop time, to stay in summer forever, to freeze everything so that nothing ever has to change, she takes it without hesitation. That decision triggers the apocalypse. Bill uses the interdimensional rift that Mabel unknowingly handed him to tear open the sky and bring Weirdmageddon down on Gravity Falls. The end of the world begins because a 12-year-old girl was too afraid of growing up to think clearly. Now, it would be easy to blame Mabel for this, and some fans do, but a psychologist would see it differently. A psychologist would see a child who was never taught how to process the fear of change. A child whose emotional needs were so unaddressed, whose attachment anxiety was so unmanaged, that when the crisis came, she had no tools to deal with it. She reached for the only thing that felt safe, which was stopping time itself. During Weirdmageddon, Mabel is trapped in a giant bubble created by Bill. Inside the bubble is a fantasy world called Mabeland, where everything is perfect. Summer never ends. Dipper never leaves. There are no consequences, no difficult feelings, no growing up. It is a prison made of comfort, and Mabel, at first, does not want to leave. When Dipper enters the bubble to rescue her, he finds a version of himself that Mabel created. A Dipper who agrees with everything she says. A Dipper who never challenges her. A Dipper who is essentially a puppet designed to make Mabel feel safe. The real Dipper looks at this fake version of himself and is understandably horrified. But the fake Dipper reveals something important about Mabel's psychology. On some level, Mabel does not want a real relationship with her brother. She wants an idealized one. One where he never disagrees, never grows, never changes, and never leaves. A psychologist would call this a form of emotional enmeshment. When two people are enmeshed, their identities are so tangled together that one person cannot imagine being a separate individual without the other. Any move toward independence by one person is experienced as abandonment by the other. The enmeshed person does not see the boundary between where they end and the other person begins. They think of the relationship as one unit, and any threat to that unit feels like a threat to their very existence. The show's handling of Mabeland in Weirdmageddon. Part 2. Escape from reality is remarkably sophisticated from a psychological standpoint. The bubble world is not just a prison, it is a therapeutic mirror. Everything inside it reflects Mabel's deepest fears and desires in exaggerated form. The sun never sets because Mabel cannot face endings. The rules do not apply because Mabel resists the constraints of growing up. And everyone inside the bubble is perfectly agreeable because Mabel is terrified of conflict, terrified that the people she loves might disagree with her, might choose something different, might leave. When Dipper enters the bubble, the fake version of himself is specifically designed to highlight what Mabel has been unconsciously asking for throughout the series. A brother who never pushes back, a brother who goes along with every plan, a brother who exists entirely in service to Mabel's emotional needs. The fake Dipper even accuses the real Dipper of being a bad brother simply because he has his own wants and opinions. It is a devastating moment because it forces both the character and the audience to confront an uncomfortable truth. Mabel's love for Dipper, as genuine as it is, has a controlling dimension that she has never examined. This does not make Mabel a bad person. It makes her a realistic 12-year-old who is terrified of losing the most important relationship in her life. But the show, to its enormous credit, does not excuse this pattern just because Mabel is sympathetic. It asks her to face it. It asks her to choose between the comfortable lie and the painful truth. And the fact that she chooses truth, that she walks out of the bubble and back into a world where summer ends and brothers grow and nothing stays the same forever, is one of the most important moments of character growth in the entire series. There is a psychological concept called differentiation, which refers to the ability to maintain your own sense of self while remaining emotionally connected to the people you love. It is one of the hardest developmental tasks any human being faces, and it is the task that Mabel confronts in the bubble. She has to learn that she can be Mabel without being half of Mabel and Dipper. That loving someone does not mean owning them. That closeness and autonomy are not opposites. They are both necessary for any relationship to be healthy. Mabel does not fully achieve differentiation by the end of the show. She is 12. She has decades of growth ahead of her. But she takes the first step. She chooses the real world over the fantasy. She chooses the real Dipper over the puppet version. And that first step, shaky and scared and imperfect as it is, changes the trajectory of her life. Mabel's growth in the finale comes from confronting this directly. She has to choose between the fantasy of a brother who never changes and the reality of a brother who is his own person. She has to accept that summer will end, that high school will start, that she and Dipper will grow in different directions, that this is not abandonment, this is life. She makes the right choice. She leaves Mabeland. She chooses reality. She chooses the brother who is imperfect and complicated and sometimes wants different things than she does. And in doing so, she takes the first real step toward becoming her own person. Not Mabel and Dipper, but just Mabel. It is one of the most quietly radical moments in children's television. A show telling its young audience that growing up is scary and it happens anyway, that you cannot freeze time, that the people you love will change, that you will change, and that the love itself does not have to end just because the form it takes evolves. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But the Pines family is not just blood relatives. There is someone else who has been standing in the mystery shack for over a decade, fixing things that break, smiling through his own pain, and quietly waiting for a family to claim him. And that person is Sus. Jesus Alzamirano Ramirez, known to everyone as Sus, is the handyman of the mystery shack. He has worked there since he was 12 years old. He is big, warm, goofy, endlessly loyal, and the kind of person who will do anything for the people he cares about without ever once asking for anything in return. In a show full of complicated, psychologically layered characters, Sus might seem like the simple one. The comic relief. The lovable goofball who fixes the vending machine and tags along on adventures. But Sus is carrying something that most people in his life have never seen. And the show, in one of its most emotionally devastating episodes, finally pulls back the curtain and shows us what it is. In the episode Blendin's Game, we learn why Sus hates his birthday. It is not a quirky character detail, it is a wound. Sus has not seen his father since he was 4 years old. Every year on his birthday, his father sends a postcard from wherever he is, always with the same message. Sorry, he could not make it this year, but he will definitely be there next year. And every year, young Seuss waits. He sits by the door. He watches the street. He hopes. And his father never comes. When Dipper and Mabel travel back in time and witness 12-year-old Seuss's birthday, they see the moment the hope finally dies. Young Seuss opens another postcard with the same empty promise. He puts it in a box with all the others. He does not cry. He does not throw a tantrum. He just goes quiet, and his grandmother, his abuelita, who has been the one actually raising him, tries to comfort him with dinosaur-shaped cookies. He refuses them. That quiet refusal is more heartbreaking than any scream or breakdown could be, because it tells us that this child has reached the limit of what sugar and kindness can fix. He knows the truth now. His father is never coming back, and no amount of cookies is going to change that. A psychologist would look at Seuss and see a textbook case of father abandonment and its aftermath. Children who are abandoned by a parent, particularly in early childhood, often develop a specific set of coping mechanisms. They become people pleasers. They become hyper-attentive to the needs of others. They learn to be so useful, so indispensable, so impossible to dislike that nobody would ever want to leave them. Their logic, which operates below the level of conscious thought, goes something like this. My father left because I was not enough. If I can be enough for everyone else, no one will ever leave me again. That is Seuss. His entire personality, the helpfulness, the eagerness, the willingness to do anything anyone asks of him is built on a foundation of abandonment. He is not just being nice, he is earning his place. He is making himself necessary so that the people around him will have a reason to keep him. And the person he has poured most of that energy into is Stan. Seuss came to the Mystery Shack on his 12th birthday. He found a screwdriver on the ground, one that Dipper had accidentally dropped while time traveling. Stan, who had just fired his previous handyman, saw a kid with a tool and hired him on the spot. From that day forward, Seuss became a permanent fixture of the shack. He fixed things. He helped with tours. He did whatever Stan told him to do. And in return, Stan gave him something his father never had: presents. Stan was there, every day. Grumpy and cheap and occasionally illegal, but there. And for a kid who had spent 8 years waiting for a father who never showed up, that consistency was everything. Seuss does not call Stan his boss. In practice, Stan is his father figure, the man who showed up, the man who stayed. And the show makes this explicit in small ways throughout the series. Seuss defends Stan. He trusts Stan. He looks up to Stan. When the Mystery Shack is threatened, Seuss is the first one to fight for it, not because it is a building, but because it is the place where he found the family his father refused to be. The most psychologically powerful moment in Seuss's arc comes at the end of Blendin's game. Dipper and Mabel have won a time wish, a magical device that can make any wish come true without creating paradoxes. They bring it to Seuss and gently suggest that he might want to use it to see his father, to finally have the reunion he spent his childhood hoping for. Seuss looks at the wish. He looks at Dipper and Mabel, who are banged up and bruised from fighting through gladiatorial time combat to get this gift for him. And he makes a choice that defines his entire character. He does not wish to see his father. He wishes for Dipper and Mabel to be cleaned up from their injuries. And he wishes for an infinite slice of pizza. Then he says, simply, that Dipper and Mabel are his real family. That if his father truly cared, he would have been there. And he hugs the twins. That moment is not played for laughs. It is not a joke about pizza. It is a man in his 20s making one of the most psychologically mature decisions in the entire series. He is choosing to stop waiting. He is choosing to stop hoping for someone who has already proven, through decades of absence, that he is not coming. and he is choosing instead to invest his love in the people who actually show up for him. A psychologist would call this a pivotal moment of healthy attachment reorientation. Seuss does not just reject his father. He redefines what family means. Family is not blood. Family is not obligation. Family is the people who are there on your worst day, the people who fight through time itself just to make your birthday a little better. And Seuss, by making that choice, frees himself from the cycle of waiting that had defined his life since he was 4 years old. He throws the last postcard from his father in the trash. He walks into his birthday with the twins by his side, and for the first time, he does not hate the day he was born. What makes Seuss's arc even more remarkable is what the show does with it afterward. Seuss does not become bitter. He does not become a cautionary tale about absent fathers. He becomes the most emotionally generous character on the show. By the end of the series, Stan trusts Seuss with the Mystery Shack itself, the thing Stan built with his own hands, the thing that represents 30 years of his life. He does not hand it to Ford. He does not keep it for himself. He gives it to the 22-year-old handyman who showed up at his door with a screwdriver and a smile and never left. That moment is Stan saying, without words, what he has never been able to say out loud. You are my family. You were always my family. And this place that I built, this home that I made, it is yours now. Because you earned it, not with money or achievement or genius. You earned it by being here, by being kind, by being Seuss. For a man like Stan, who was taught that worth is measured in dollars, giving the shack to Seuss is an act of profound psychological rewriting. He is rejecting Philbrick's paradigm. He is saying that the most valuable thing he owns should go to the person who showed up, not the person who achieved the most. It is a quiet revolution against everything Stan was taught about what makes a person matter. And Seuss receives it with the same open-hearted grace that defines his entire character. He does not question whether he deserves it. He does not perform false modesty. He accepts it the way a person accepts a gift from someone they love, with gratitude and without apology. Because Seuss, for all his goofiness and his simplicity, has something that most of the Pines family spent the entire series trying to develop. He knows how to receive love. He knows how to let people care for him without asking what the catch is. He knows that showing up is enough, that being present is enough, that you do not have to be the smartest or the bravest or the most successful person in the room to deserve a seat at the table. Seuss learned this not from his father, who taught him nothing, but from his grandmother, his abuelita, who raised him with warmth and stability when his father chose absence. The show does not give Abuelita many scenes, but the ones she has are powerful. She is the bedrock beneath Seuss, the person who made sure that the abandonment did not define him entirely, the person who taught him through years of consistent presence that people could stay. That love did not have to come with conditions or postcards or promises that were never kept. In psychology, the concept of a good enough caregiver refers to someone who does not need to be perfect. They just need to be present, consistent, and attuned to the child's needs often enough that the child develops a secure base from which to explore the world. Abuelita was that for Seuss. She was his good enough. And the fact that Seuss grew up to be a person who could love freely, who could trust genuinely, who could choose his own family without bitterness or resentment toward the father who abandoned him, is a testament to what one stable, loving presence can do in a child's life, even when everything else is falling apart. Seuss is proof that the cycle can be broken, not by intelligence, not by willpower, not by magic, by love that shows up day after day, birthday after birthday, without fail. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But now that we have looked at each member of this extended family individually, the question becomes, what happens when you put them all together? What kind of system do they create? And what does that system tell us about how families actually work? Up until now, we have looked at each member of the Pines family, one by one. Philbrick, the conditional father; Stan, the abandoned con man; Ford, the lonely genius; Dipper, the anxious investigator; Mabel, the attachment-seeking optimist; Suze, the chosen family member. We have seen their individual wounds, their coping mechanisms, their fears, and their growth. But a family is not a collection of individuals. It is a system. And the Pines family system, when you step back and look at it as a whole, is one of the most carefully constructed in animation history. Because almost every major conflict in the show is not really about monsters or demons or supernatural threats. It is about the same thing: trust, and whether the people in this family can learn to do it before it is too late. The rift that causes Weirdmageddon is a literal crack between dimensions. But it is also a metaphor so precise that it almost feels too on the nose. The Pines family is full of rifts: the rift between Stan and Ford that lasted 30 years, the rift between Ford and Philbrick that was never healed, the rift that started forming between Dipper and Mabel as the summer drew to a close, the rift between Seuss and his absent father. These are cracks in the family's foundation, and Bill Cipher, the show's villain, does not create these cracks. He exploits them. This is something a psychologist would find remarkable about Gravity Falls. The show understands on a fundamental level how dysfunction works. Dysfunction does not come from outside the family. It comes from inside. It lives in the things people do not say, in the apologies that are never offered, in the feelings that are never acknowledged, in the patterns that repeat because nobody stops to examine them. Bill Cipher is a dream demon with nearly unlimited power, but the tool he uses to destroy the world is not magic. It is emotional manipulation. He gets to Ford by exploiting Ford's loneliness and intellectual vanity. He gets to Mabel by exploiting her fear of change and separation. He gets to the Pines family by exploiting the fact that they do not communicate with each other about the things that matter most. Think about the sequence of events that leads to Weirdmageddon. Ford discovers the dimensional rift, but does not tell Stan, Mabel, or Seuss about it. He tells only Dipper, putting an enormous burden of secrecy on a 12-year-old. Dipper, following Ford's example, does not tell Mabel about the rift. When Mabel learns that Dipper might stay in Gravity Falls as Ford's apprentice, she has no context for understanding why this decision is so complicated. She does not know about the rift. She does not know about Bill. She only knows that her brother is choosing someone else over her. And in that moment of emotional crisis, with no information and no support, she makes the worst possible decision. The lesson is devastatingly clear. Secrets do not protect people. They isolate them. They create the conditions under which bad decisions become inevitable. If Ford had trusted his family enough to tell them about the rift, if Dipper had trusted Mabel enough to share the burden, if anyone in this house had been willing to be vulnerable with the people they loved, Weirdmageddon might never have happened. And this is the cycle that the show traces across 2 generations. Philbrick taught his sons that vulnerability was weakness. Stan learned to hide behind lies and schemes. Ford learned to hide behind intellect and isolation. And when it was time for those patterns to transfer to the next generation, they nearly destroyed the world. But here is where Gravity Falls does something extraordinary, something that separates it from almost every other family story in animation. It shows the cycle breaking. In the final confrontation with Bill, the moment that saves everything is not a weapon or a spell or a clever trick. It is an act of trust between 2 brothers who have spent 40 years failing to trust each other. Stan and Ford switch clothes. Stan pretends to be Ford. Ford pretends to be Stan. They trust each other with their lives, their identities, and their futures. And it works. Not because the plan is perfect, but because for the first time in their lives, they are working together instead of apart. Stan lets Bill into his mind. Ford fires the memory gun. Stan's memories begin to dissolve. And in that dissolving, in that erasure, something else happens. The rift between the brothers finally closes. Not because someone apologized, not because someone was right, but because Stan was willing to lose himself entirely so that Ford could live. And Ford was willing to destroy his brother's mind, the most painful thing he has ever done, because Stan asked him to. That is not just heroism. That is the deepest form of trust. It is saying, I believe you. I believe in what we are doing. I believe that you know what you are asking of me. And I will do it because you asked. And afterward, when Stan's memories are restored through Mabel's scrapbook, the scrapbook that she made all summer long, documenting every moment, every adventure, every shared experience, the message is clear. Memory is not stored in the brain alone. It is stored in the people who love you. It is stored in the stories they tell about you. It is stored in the evidence of a life shared. Stan comes back because his family brings him back. Not with science, not with magic, with love, with proof that he mattered, with a book full of photographs and stickers and handwritten captions that said, over and over in a 12-year-old girl's handwriting, "You were here. You were part of this. You were ours." A psychologist would look at this ending and see something genuinely hopeful. The Pines family does not end the show healed. Stan still carries his father's rejection inside him. Ford still struggles with trust. Dipper is still anxious. Mabel is still afraid of change. Suze still misses the father who never came back. Nobody is fixed. Nobody is cured. But they are connected. They have chosen each other. They have looked at the full scope of each other's damage, the lies, the secrets, the selfishness, the fear, and they have said, I see all of that, and I am still here. That is not a fairy tale ending. That is a real one. Because real families do not fix each other. Real families decide over and over, day after day, crisis after crisis, to stay, to keep showing up, to keep trying, to keep choosing the messy, imperfect, infuriating people who share your name and your history and your blood, even when it would be so much easier to walk away. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But there is one more thing we need to talk about. One more layer that makes the Pines family story not just interesting, but genuinely important. And that is what all of this has to say about something every single person listening to this has experienced or will experience growing up. One of the most elegant structural choices Alex Hirsch made in Gravity Falls was to build the show around two sets of twins whose stories mirror each other. Stan and Ford. Dipper and Mabel, the older generation and the younger generation, the ones who got it wrong and the ones who still have a chance to get it right. The parallels are everywhere, and they are not accidental. Stan is the streetwise, socially adept twin who masks deep insecurity with humor and bravado. Mabel is the same. Ford is the intellectually driven, socially awkward twin who retreats into knowledge when the emotional world becomes too much. Dipper is the same. Stan and Ford's bond was broken when one of them was offered a prestigious opportunity and the other felt left behind. Dipper and Mabel face the exact same crisis when Ford offers Dipper the apprenticeship, and the show makes this parallel explicit. In A Tale of Two Stans, after hearing the older twins' story, both Dipper and Mabel are visibly shaken. not just by the revelations about their great-uncles, but by the recognition that the same fault lines exist in their own relationship. They can see the pattern. They can feel it pulling at them. And for the first time, they are genuinely afraid not of monsters, but of each other, of what they might become if they are not careful. This is one of the most psychologically sophisticated things the show does. It shows its young audience that family patterns are real, that the mistakes of one generation can echo in the next, that the way your parents or grandparents handled conflict, communication, and closeness shapes the way you will handle those things, often without you even realizing it. It is not magic. It is not fate. It is the quiet inheritance of behavior, the way a child watches the adults in their life and absorbs their strategies for dealing with pain. But Gravity Falls does not stop at showing the pattern. It shows the pattern being broken, and the way it breaks is instructive. Stan and Ford's relationship fell apart because of a combination of factors. Philbrick's conditional love, which turned the brothers into rivals for their father's approval. The science fair incident, which created a wound that neither brother knew how to heal. And decades of silence, during which resentment and regret hardened into permanent features of their relationship. Dipper and Mabel face similar pressures. Ford's apprenticeship offer puts them in direct competition for the first time. Mabel's fear of separation mirrors Stan's fear of losing Ford. Dipper's desire for validation from Ford mirrors Ford's desire for validation from the intellectual world. All the ingredients are there for a repeat of the older twins' catastrophe. But two things are different this time. First, Dipper and Mabel have something Stan and Ford never had. They have each other's history in front of them. They have seen what happens when twins let a rift grow between them. They have watched Stan and Ford struggle. They have heard the story, and knowing the pattern exists gives them a chance, just a chance, to choose differently. Second, and this is the crucial difference, Dipper and Mabel actually talk to each other. Badly, imperfectly, too late in some cases, but they communicate. When Mabel is trapped in the bubble during Weird Mageddon, Dipper does not give up on her. He walks into her fantasy world and tells her the truth, which is that he loves her, and he is scared too, and he does not know what will happen when they go home, but he knows that whatever happens, they will face it together. He does not promise that things will not change. He promises that he will be there while they do. That is the moment the Pines family cycle breaks, not with a grand gesture or a heroic sacrifice, although those happen too. It breaks with a 12-year-old boy sitting in a fantasy prison made of glitter and endless summer and saying to his sister, "I'm here, I'm not leaving, let's go home." A psychologist would look at this and say that what Dipper does in that moment is called secure attachment behavior. He acknowledges the other person's fear without reinforcing it. He offers presence without promising control. He says, in essence, "I cannot stop change from happening, but I can face it with you." That is the opposite of what Philbrick did when he kicked Stan out. It is the opposite of what Ford did when he chose isolation over connection. It is the thing that every character in this family needed to hear and never did, until now. And the significance of this moment extends beyond just the twins. It represents something that psychologists who study family systems call a corrective emotional experience. This is when someone in a family, usually in the younger generation, encounters the same type of crisis that damaged the older generation, but responds to it differently. The crisis is the same, the fear is the same, the stakes are the same. But the choice is different, and that different choice sends a ripple backward through the family's history, not erasing the old pain, but proving that the old pain does not have to be the final word. Dipper and Mabel's choice to stay together is a corrective emotional experience for the entire Pines family. It does not undo Philbrick's cruelty. It does not heal the 30 years Stan and Ford lost. But it proves that the pattern can be interrupted, that a pair of Pines twins can face the same pressure, the same fear of separation, the same pull toward individual ambition, and choose each other anyway. Not because they are better people than Stan and Ford, but because they had something Stan and Ford never had. They had the older twins' story as a warning, and they had each other at the right moment in the right place with enough love and enough courage to make a different choice. This is how generational healing actually works, not through grand interventions or therapeutic breakthroughs, although those can help, but through small, brave choices made by ordinary people who look at the patterns they inherited and say, "Not this time, not with us." And the ripple effects of that choice extend outward. Stan and Ford, watching the younger twins choose each other, are forced to reckon with their own failure to do the same. Their reconciliation in the finale is not just about saving the world from Bill. It is about two old men finally admitting that they need each other, that they have always needed each other, that the decades of silence and resentment were not strength. They were waste. The final image of the show is not Dipper and Mabel saving the day. It is not Bill being defeated. It is Stan and Ford, together on a boat, sailing into the unknown, fulfilling the dream they had as children. Two old men who lost 40 years to a family pattern that nobody taught them how to escape, finally free. Not because someone fixed them, because they made the choice, at last, to stop letting the damage win. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Before we continue with the family analysis, we need to talk about someone who is not technically a Pines, but whose story is inseparable from theirs. Fiddleford Hadron McGucket. Because if you want to understand what happens when family dysfunction radiates outward and destroys someone who was just standing too close, you only need to look at McGucket. McGucket was Ford's college roommate and research partner at Backups Moore University. He was brilliant, a gifted engineer who could build almost anything from almost nothing. Ford brought him to Gravity Falls to help construct the interdimensional portal, and for a time, they worked together beautifully. Two gifted minds at the frontier of the unknown. It should have been the greatest collaboration of McGucket's life. But Ford had a secret. Bill Cipher was the true architect of the portal's design, whispering plans into Ford's mind during their psychic link. And because Ford was already deep into his pattern of intellectual isolation, the pattern that started with Philbrick's conditional love and hardened through years of being the special one who needed no one, he never told McGucket the truth about where the ideas were really coming from. During the first test of the portal, something went horribly wrong. McGucket got caught and was briefly pulled into the space between dimensions. What he saw there, the nightmare realm, the chaos of Bill's intended future for their world, traumatized him beyond anything he could have prepared for. He came back screaming. He came back changed. He begged Ford to destroy the portal. He told Ford this would bring the end of everything. Ford, still under Bill's spell, still intoxicated by the demon's validation, refused to listen. McGucket left. And this is where his story becomes a devastating psychological case study. He could not live with what he had seen. The memory was too large, too horrifying, too destabilizing. So he built a device to remove it. The memory gun, a machine that could target and erase specific memories from the human brain. He used it on himself once, just the nightmare realm. But the relief was so immediate, so total, that he used it again and again. Every time something painful surfaced, every time the anxiety became too much, he reached for the gun. And over years of cumulative erasure, the brilliant engineer was hollowed out from the inside. He became the town crazy. Old Man McGucket, a babbling figure living in the dump, building nonsensical contraptions from garbage, unable to remember his own name. His family drifted away. His son was ashamed of him. Nobody in Gravity Falls knew that the confused old man talking to raccoons was once one of the most gifted minds in the country. A psychologist would see McGucket's arc as a devastating illustration of avoidance as a coping strategy taken to its extreme. The memory gun is a metaphor for every real-world behavior people use to escape pain. Drinking, drugs, dissociation, compulsive distraction. The logic is always the same. This hurts too much, so I will make it stop. And it works for a moment, but the damage accumulates. Every time you erase instead of process, you lose a piece of yourself. McGucket lost everything. Not to the nightmare realm, to his own refusal to sit with what the nightmare realm had shown him. And the connection to the Pines family is direct. Ford's secrecy created the conditions for McGucket's trauma. Ford did not aim the memory gun at his friend, but he loaded it. He created the situation that made the gun feel necessary. The fact that McGucket eventually recovers, that he regains his identity and becomes the man who designs the Shacktron in the final battle, is one of the show's most hopeful threads. And his recovery parallels Stan's. When Stan loses his memory defeating Bill, the family does not accept the loss. Mabel reads the scrapbook. Dipper tells stories. They surround Stan with evidence of who he was, and slowly, he comes back. The message in both cases is identical. You do not heal by erasing. You heal by remembering, not alone, never alone, with the people who refuse to let you disappear now. With all of these characters laid out, with all of their wounds visible, let us talk about the creature who exploited every single one of them. Bill Cipher is not just a villain, he is a psychological phenomenon wearing a top hat. Bill is a dream demon, a two-dimensional being who destroyed his own dimension and has spent trillions of years manipulating beings across the multiverse. He is charming, he is funny, he is terrifying, he makes deals, he possesses bodies, he turns reality inside out. But the most dangerous thing about Bill is not his power. It is his understanding of people. Bill does not brute force his way through the Pines family's defenses. He slithers through the cracks that already exist. He finds the person in the family who is most isolated, most hungry, most desperate for validation, and he offers them exactly what they need to hear. He is, in clinical terms, a textbook predator. And the techniques he uses are the same techniques used by real predators in the real world. What makes Bill particularly terrifying from a psychological perspective is that he is patient. He does not rush. He spent years cultivating his relationship with Ford, building trust incrementally, offering insights and revelations at exactly the right pace to keep Ford hooked without overwhelming him. He understood that the most effective manipulation is the kind that feels like friendship, the kind where the target does not feel manipulated at all, the kind where the target looks back on the relationship and cannot pinpoint the moment where things went wrong, because there was no single moment. It was a gradual, imperceptible slide from partnership into control. This patience is what makes Bill different from most cartoon villains. He is not a monster who bursts through the door. He is a monster who is invited in, and that is far more disturbing because it raises a question that the show never fully answers and never needs to. If Bill had not betrayed Ford, if the portal had worked the way Ford believed it would Ford have ever realized he was being used? Or would he have walked willingly into the nightmare realm, convinced until the very end that he was making a free choice? That ambiguity is intentional, and it mirrors the ambiguity that real victims of manipulation face every day. The partner who was charming and attentive for months before the first act of cruelty. The friend who was supportive and encouraging for years before the first betrayal. The mentor who seemed to have your best interests at heart until the day you realized they only ever had their own. Bill does not just exploit Ford either. His manipulation of Mabel in Dipper and Mabel versus the Future is equally sophisticated, just operating on different vulnerabilities. While Bill seduced Ford through his intellect, he seduces Mabel through her emotions. He does not offer her knowledge or cosmic significance. He offers her relief, the simple, devastating promise that she does not have to feel what she is feeling, that the pain can stop, that summer can last forever. And Mabel, in her moment of crisis, takes the deal. Not because she is stupid, not because she is weak, because she is 12 years old and her world is falling apart and nobody has equipped her with the tools to handle it. Her parents sent her to Gravity Falls in a hurry. Ford barely acknowledges her existence. Dipper is pulling away. Stan is preoccupied with his own conflict with Ford. In the moment Bill approaches her, Mabel is more alone than she has ever been. And Bill, who has been reading human vulnerability for trillions of years, knows exactly what that looks like. The lesson the show teaches through Bill's manipulation of both Ford and Mabel is the same lesson it teaches through every other storyline. Isolation makes people vulnerable. Connection makes them strong. Bill can only operate in the spaces between people, in the secrets they keep, in the conversations they avoid, in the trust they withhold. Every gap in the Pines family's communication is an open door for Bill. Every unspoken fear, every unshared burden, every moment of choosing pride over honesty is an invitation. And the way Bill is ultimately defeated makes this point with mathematical precision. He is not defeated by a weapon or a spell or a clever code. He is defeated by an act of radical family trust. Stan and Ford switch identities. They trust each other with their lives. They communicate a plan in a crisis and execute it without hesitation. They do the thing they have been failing to do for 40 years. They work together. Bill cannot compute this. He has spent his existence exploiting division. The idea that two people who have been at war for decades could suddenly, in the space of a few minutes, choose unity over ego is something Bill's model of human behavior simply does not account for. He walked into Stan's mind expecting Ford's. He expected the same division, the same distrust, the same exploitable cracks, and instead he found a wall of cooperation so complete that it destroyed him. The dream demon was beaten by the thing he could never understand. A family that chose, at the last possible moment, to trust each other more than they feared each other. That is not just a satisfying narrative conclusion. That is a psychological thesis statement. With Ford, Bill used intellectual flattery and the promise of cosmic significance. Ford was alone, brilliant, and starving for connection. Bill presented himself as the one being in the universe who understood Ford's mind. He gave Ford a sense of purpose and partnership that no human had ever offered. And once Ford was hooked, once he had built his entire sense of identity around his relationship with Bill, the demon began to isolate him further. He planted doubts about McGucket. He encouraged Ford to work in secret. He made Ford dependent on him and him alone. This is the same pattern that psychologists observe in abusive relationships, cult recruitment, and radicalization. The predator identifies vulnerability. The predator provides what the vulnerable person needs. The predator creates dependency, and then the predator uses that dependency to control. With Mabel, Bill used a different approach because Mabel's vulnerability was different. He did not need to offer her intellectual validation. He offered her something simpler and more devastating. He offered her the thing she wanted most in the world, the ability to stop time, to freeze the summer, to keep Dipper beside her forever. Bill, disguised as the time traveler Blendin, found Mabel at her most emotionally fragile. Her party had fallen apart. Her friends were distracted. Dipper was considering leaving her for Ford's apprenticeship. She was alone and afraid and desperate for anything that would make the feelings stop. And Bill, who has been manipulating vulnerable people for trillions of years, saw his opening and walked right through it. He did not force Mabel to hand over the interdimensional rift. He did not threaten her. He simply offered her what she wanted. He said, in essence, "You can have what you need, just give me this small thing." And Mabel, not knowing what the rift was, not understanding the consequences, said yes. This is what makes Bill so chilling as a villain. He does not operate through strength. He operates through the gaps in families, through the conversations that were never had, through the secrets that were kept out of fear or pride, through the emotional needs that went unmet because the people who should have met them were too busy dealing with their own damage. If Ford had told his family about the rift, Mabel would have known what she was holding. If Dipper had told Mabel about the rift, she would have known that the glowing globe in her backpack was the most dangerous object in the universe. If the Pines family had communicated, had trusted each other, had been honest about their fears and their needs, Bill would have had nothing to work with. Bill Cipher does not create dysfunction. He feeds on it. He is the external consequence of internal family failure. And the fact that he is finally defeated not by a weapon or a spell, but by an act of radical family trust, Stan and Ford working together for the first time in 40 years, is the show's final and most powerful statement about what truly protects us from the monsters in the world. It is not intelligence. It is not strength. It is not even courage. It is the willingness to be known by the people you love. The willingness to drop the mask, tell the truth, and trust that the people on the other side of that truth will still be there when the dust settles. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. We have spent a long time pulling this family apart, tracing every wound back to its source, following every pattern through the generations. And now, we are at the end. So the question becomes, if you sat the entire Pines family down in front of a real psychologist, what would that professional see? What would they recommend? And does the show itself provide the answers? The first thing a psychologist would notice is the role that secrecy plays in this family's dysfunction. Almost every major crisis in the Pines family story can be traced back to someone keeping a secret from someone else. Stan hides his real identity for 30 years. Ford hides his partnership with Bill. Ford hides the rift from everyone except Dipper. Dipper hides the rift from Mabel. Mabel hides her fear of separation until it is too late. Even Philbrick hid his emotions behind dark glasses and a stonewall demeanor, keeping his sons in a constant state of uncertainty about where they stood. A family therapist would make transparency the first priority, not forced confession, not aggressive truth-telling designed to punish or shame, but a gradual, supported process of learning that the truth, even when it is uncomfortable, is less dangerous than the secrets. For Stan, the work would center on his identity. Stan spent 30 years pretending to be someone else. He literally erased Stanley Pines from the public record and became Stanford. A therapist would help Stan understand that this was not just a practical decision. It was a reflection of how deeply he had internalized his father's message that Stanley Pines was not good enough to exist. The work would be about reclaiming his name, reclaiming his history, learning that the man who spent 30 years in a basement trying to save his brother is not a screw-up. He is someone who loved so much that he was willing to disappear. For Ford, the work would be about vulnerability. Ford has spent his entire adult life building walls, a metal plate in his skull to keep Bill out, a laboratory full of countermeasures, a life philosophy built on the phrase, "Trust no one." A therapist would help Ford understand that the walls he built to protect himself from Bill are the same walls that keep him from connecting with the people who actually care about him. They would help him see that his intelligence is not a replacement for human connection. That being smart does not mean being safe, and that the loneliness he feels is not a byproduct of his brilliance. It is a consequence of his refusal to let anyone in. Ford would also need to confront his role in what happened to Stan. He watched his brother get kicked out and said nothing. He spent decades blaming Stan for the science fair without ever considering the role that his own passivity played. A therapist would help Ford see that silence in the face of injustice is not neutrality. It is complicity, and that some of the anger he directs at Stan is actually anger at himself for not standing up when it mattered. For Dipper, the recommendations would focus on his anxiety and his relationship with control. Dipper's need to understand everything, to have a plan, to know the answers before the questions are even asked, is not just a personality trait. It is a coping mechanism for a child who feels fundamentally unsafe in the world. A psychologist would help Dipper develop tolerance for uncertainty. Not by forcing him to stop thinking, but by helping him see that some of the most important things in life, love, trust, courage, cannot be analyzed or controlled. They can only be experienced. They would also help Dipper understand that his worth is not tied to his usefulness. He does not need to solve every mystery to deserve a seat at the table. He does not need to be the smartest person in the room to be valued. He is worth loving, not because of what he does, but because of who he is. And that distinction, simple as it sounds, could save him from spending the next 50 years repeating Ford's mistakes. For Mabel, the work would center on attachment and individuation. Mabel needs to learn that loving someone and being dependent on someone are not the same thing. That Dipper can grow in a different direction without growing away from her. That she is a whole person, not half of a pair. A therapist would help Mabel develop her own identity separate from her brother, not to weaken their bond, but to strengthen it. Because the healthiest relationships are between two complete people who choose each other, not two incomplete people who cling to each other out of fear. They would also address Mabel's pattern of using positivity as avoidance. Mabel's optimism is wonderful and genuine, but it can also function as a way of not dealing with difficult emotions. When she refuses to acknowledge that something is wrong, when she insists on seeing the bright side even when there is no bright side, she is not being brave. She is running from the feeling, and the feelings she runs from do not go away. They accumulate until they become a crisis, which is exactly what happened when Bill offered her the bubble. For Seuss, a therapist would acknowledge what Seuss already knows. His father chose not to be there. That choice was not Seuss's fault. It was never his fault. And the love he gives to the Pines family, the loyalty, the service, the willingness to drop everything for anyone who needs him is beautiful, but it should not come at the cost of his own needs. Seuss deserves to be taken care of, not just to take care of others. He deserves to ask for help without feeling like asking makes him a burden. For the family as a whole, the biggest recommendation would be the same one we talked about with the Griffins, but with a crucial difference. The Pines family, unlike the Griffins, actually learns. They actually change. They do not reset at the end of every episode. They carry their experiences forward. They remember what happened. They grow. A family therapist working with the Pines family would also want to address the family's relationship with secrecy, because secrecy is the connective tissue that holds all of their dysfunction together. Every crisis in this family's history was enabled, amplified, or directly caused by someone keeping a secret. Ford kept Bill's secret from McGucket. Stan kept his identity secret from everyone. Ford kept the rift secret from the family. Dipper kept the rift secret from Mabel. The parents, barely visible in the show, kept their marital problems secret from the twins. The therapist would help the family develop what is sometimes called a culture of disclosure, not forced transparency where everyone is required to share everything, but a shared understanding that secrets carry costs. That the short-term comfort of not telling the truth is almost always outweighed by the long-term damage of the lie. That the people in this family are strong enough to hear the truth even when the truth is scary. Especially when the truth is scary. They would also address the family's pattern of placing children in adult roles. Dipper was asked to keep the rift secret, a burden no 12-year-old should carry. Mabel was left to manage her own separation anxiety without adult support. Stan used Dipper and Mabel as unpaid labor in the shack and occasionally put them in genuinely dangerous situations. Ford treated Dipper as a peer rather than a child, projecting onto him expectations that belonged in an adult mentoring relationship, not a great-uncle and great-nephew dynamic. A therapist would remind the adults in this family, gently but firmly, that children are not equipped to carry adult burdens. That asking a child to keep a world-ending secret is not trust, it is abdication. That treating a child like a colleague is not respect. It is a failure to provide the age-appropriate guidance and protection that child needs. The twins can handle a lot. They proved that throughout the summer. But they should never have been placed in the position of having to handle it in the first place. The show ends with Stan and Ford sailing together, with Dipper and Mabel going home, changed but not broken. With Seuss running the mystery shack alongside Melody, the woman who loves him. With Gravity Falls restored, scarred but standing. Nobody is fixed. Stan still carries his father's voice inside him. Ford still flinches when someone gets too close. Dipper is still anxious. Mabel is still afraid of change. Suze still misses the father who never came back. The wounds are there. They will always be there. And a psychologist would say that this is exactly right. This is what real recovery looks like. The wounds do not disappear. The triggers do not vanish. The old patterns do not evaporate because you had one good summer or one breakthrough moment or one conversation where everyone finally told the truth. What changes is the relationship to the wounds. What changes is the distance between the trigger and the response. What changes is the ability to catch yourself, to notice the old pattern activating and to make a different choice. Not every time, but more often than before. Enough to matter, enough to feel the difference. Stan will still hear Philbrick's voice telling him he is worthless, but now he has other voices too. Ford's voice saying, "You saved me." Mabel's voice saying, "Grunkle Stan." Dipper's voice saying, "I trust you." Seuss's voice saying, "You are the most important person in my life." The old voice does not go away, but it is no longer the only voice in the room. And over time, if Stan lets it, the new voices will get louder. Not because the old voice gets quieter, but because there are more people speaking. More evidence that the old voice was wrong. More proof, accumulated day by day and season by season, that Stanley Pines was always worth something. But the family is together. Not because they ignored the wounds, because they showed them to each other. Because they trusted each other with the ugliest, most frightening parts of themselves. Because they made the choice, over and over, to stay. Gravity Falls is a show about monsters and mysteries and a dream demon who wants to destroy reality. But underneath all of that, it is a show about something much more terrifying and much more real. It is a show about a family learning to be honest, learning to be vulnerable, learning that the people who love you do not need you to be perfect. They just need you to be there. And the scariest monster in Gravity Falls was never Bill Cipher. It was the silence between two brothers who loved each other and could not find the words to say it for 40 years. It was a father who hid behind dark glasses and measured his son's worth in dollars. It was a little girl who would rather freeze time than face the future. It was a little boy who would rather trust a book than a person. It was a man who would rather erase himself than believe he deserved to stay. The real monsters live in the things we do not say, in the doors we do not open, in the people we do not trust. And the only way to defeat them, the only way that has ever worked, is to look at the person standing next to you and say the three most dangerous words in any language. I trust you. Gravity Falls ran for 2 seasons, 40 episodes, 1 summer, and in that space, it told one of the most psychologically honest family stories in the history of animated television. There is something remarkable about the fact that this story was told in a children's show. Not because children do not deserve complex stories, they do, but because the adult themes in Gravity Falls, the intergenerational trauma, the codependency, the manipulation by predatory figures, the slow erosion of identity through decades of deception, are handled with a sophistication that most live-action dramas never achieve. Alex Hirsch and his team trusted their audience to understand these themes, and the audience, many of them children when the show first aired, understood perfectly. Because children know what it feels like to be afraid that someone will leave. They know what it feels like to wonder if they are good enough. They know what it feels like to have a secret that is too big and too scary to share with anyone. It told the story of a father who valued achievement over affection and the damage that did to 2 boys who spent the rest of their lives trying to recover from it. It told the story of a con man who loved so much that he was willing to erase himself to save the people who mattered to him. It told the story of a genius who was so afraid of being hurt again that he would rather be alone forever than risk trusting the wrong person. It told the story of a boy who thought the answers were in a book and a girl who thought the answer was never growing up. And it told the story of a man who stopped waiting for the father who was never coming and chose, with open eyes and a full heart, to build his own family from the people who actually showed up. None of these stories are unique to Gravity Falls. They are happening right now in houses and apartments and dorm rooms all over the world. A teenager is hiding their birthmark under a hat because the world told them they were weird. A parent is measuring their child's worth by their grades. 2 siblings are drifting apart because neither one knows how to say "I am scared." A lonely person is being charmed by someone who sees their vulnerability and plans to exploit it. An old man is sitting in a room full of people and feeling completely alone because he has been performing a version of himself for so long that he has forgotten who he really is. Gravity Falls does not fix these things. A cartoon cannot fix the human condition. But what it can do, and what this show does better than almost any other, is hold up a mirror. It shows us the patterns. It names the wounds. It demonstrates through the story of one impossible family in one impossible town during one impossible summer that the pain we carry does not have to define us, that the cycles we inherit can be broken, that trust is terrifying and necessary and worth the risk. And it does all of this in a show about a 12-year-old boy, his 12-year-old sister, their criminal great-uncle, a dream demon, and a pig named Waddles. The Pines family is fictional, but the lessons they teach are not. And if you are lying in bed right now, listening to this, and something in their story felt familiar, then let that recognition be the beginning of something. Not an ending, a beginning. Because the most important mystery in Gravity Falls was never who wrote the journals or what was behind the vending machine or how to stop Bill Cipher. The most important mystery was always the same one that sits at the center of every family that has ever existed. Can we trust each other enough to tell the truth? The Pines family spent 2 seasons answering that question, and the answer, hard-won and imperfect and beautiful, was yes. And that yes did not come easily. It came after Stan spent 30 years lying to everyone he knew. After Ford spent 30 years trapped in dimensions where trust was a death sentence. After Dipper spent a summer learning that the journal was not enough, that knowledge without connection is just loneliness with extra steps. After Mabel spent a summer learning that love does not mean never letting go. It means holding on loosely enough that both people can breathe. After Seuss spent his entire life building a definition of family that did not require the man who was supposed to build it for him. The yes came with scars. It came with conditions. It came with the understanding that trust, once broken, is never the same shape when you put it back together. But it came, and that is the thing that matters. Not that the Pines family arrived at perfect trust, but that they arrived at trust at all, that they fought for it, that they earned it, that they chose it even when every reasonable calculation said the smart move was to walk away. A psychologist would look at this family at the end of the series and see something rare. Not a healed family. Healed is too clean a word for what the Pines have been through. But a healing family. A family in process. A family that has looked at the patterns that were handed to them, the conditional love, the secrecy, the isolation, the fear, and decided together that those patterns end here. Not perfectly, not permanently, but intentionally. With awareness, with effort, with the stubborn, beautiful refusal to let the past have the last word. And here is one final thing that a psychologist would note about this family, something that makes their story different from so many other family narratives in fiction. The Pines family does not heal through one big moment. There is no single conversation that fixes everything. There is no magic word. There is no revelation that suddenly makes the pain disappear. The healing happens in the small things. In Stan teaching Dipper to box the way Philbrick taught him, but with warmth instead of cruelty. In Ford looking at Mabel and seeing not a distraction from intellectual work, but a person whose emotional intelligence rivals his own in ways he does not fully understand. In Dipper writing in his journal, not trust no one, but a new entry about the people he trusts and why. In Mabel making a scrapbook that turns out to be the weapon that saves her uncle's mind. Think about that for a moment. Think about what the show is saying with that choice. The thing that defeats the memory erasure, the thing that brings Stan back from the void, is not science. It is not magic. It is a scrapbook, a collection of photographs and stickers and silly drawings that a 12-year-old girl made over the course of one summer. The show is making a profound psychological statement here. It is saying that our identities are not stored in our brains alone. They are stored in the people who love us, in the memories they carry of who we are, in the evidence they have collected, without even knowing they were collecting it, of every moment we shared together. Stan's memory was erased by a gun, but his identity was preserved in a scrapbook. Because identity is relational. We are who we are because of the people who know us. And when those people refuse to let go of who we are, even when we ourselves have forgotten, that is a kind of love that transcends neuroscience. In Seuss, walking into a birthday party for the first time without flinching. These are not dramatic moments, they are quiet ones. They are the kind of moments that most people would not even notice if they were not looking for them. But they are the moments that matter most. Because real change does not happen in the crisis. It happens in the Tuesday morning after the crisis when you wake up and have to decide whether you are going to do things differently today. The Pines family decides, slowly and imperfectly, to do things differently. Not all at once. Not without setbacks, not without arguments and misunderstandings and the occasional apocalypse, but consistently, steadily, with the stubborn, unreasonable persistence of people who have decided that the people sitting across the breakfast table from them are worth the effort. That is what a psychologist would call progress. Not perfection, not cure. Progress. The daily, unglamorous, uncinematic work of being a little braver than you were yesterday. Of saying the thing you have been afraid to say. Of listening to the thing you have been afraid to hear. Of staying in the room when every instinct tells you to run. The Pines family does that work. Not perfectly, but they do it. And the show argues, through every episode and every character arc and every quiet moment of connection, that the work is worth it. That the people are worth it. That even in a town where gnomes steal your sister and triangles try to destroy reality and time itself can be rewound with a tape measure, the most extraordinary thing any person can do is look at another person and say, I see you, I know you, and I choose you anyway. Thank you for listening. Sleep well. And remember, in a world full of mysteries, the people who love you are the only answer that matters. And one last thought before you go. If this video found you at a time when your own family feels broken, when the patterns feel too deep to change, when the silence between you and the person you love most feels unbridgeable, I want you to know something that the Pines family learned the hard way. You do not need to fix everything at once. You do not need a portal or a prophecy or a supernatural summer to start the process of change. You just need one honest conversation. One moment where you put down the armor and say the thing you have been afraid to say. One choice to show up when it would be easier to walk away. That is enough. That is always enough. That is how it starts. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and leave a comment. It helps us reach more people who might need to hear this. Good night.